Welcome to the Balanced Collective, where we love to go deep, talk big, and get real. I'm your host, Danielle Boyd, and every episode is going to bring a new concept or guest to talk all about things wellness, balance, and alignment. Our purpose here is to bridge the concepts of science and spirit to bring wellness and ease into the lives of our listeners while not taking life too seriously. We like to get down and deep into our shadow while keeping things raw, fun, and real. Thank you so much for listening. Let's get to it. Hey team, welcome to the podcast this week. Today's episode features Dr. Adrianna Hanson. Adrianna is a naturopathic doctor, and her view on health, wellness, and the body is very holistic. She ties everything together, lifestyle, nutrition, movement, etc., to optimize us as whole. Adrianna and I started working together a few years ago at Catalyst Kinetics in Burnaby, and I've since learned so much from her about how our systems unite, how we can just live our lives a little bit better to make us just that much healthier. This conversation today provided me with so much value, and I'm really excited to share it with you because I think it will share a lot of value for you as well. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Dr. Adrianna Hanson. All right, welcome Adrianna to the podcast. I'm so excited to be doing this right now. It's a beautiful Friday afternoon in Vancouver, and we're hanging out in Adrianna's beautiful Olympic Village apartment, and there's an awesome sunset. We can see BC Place. They've got flags all over it for the Paralympics, and it's just overall a great day. So thanks for having me. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited, Danny.
It's awesome. I'm really excited about this too because I'm not sure if any of the listeners were there in January, but Dr. Hanson spoke at our balance session, the inaugural balance session at RYU in Vancouver. And we had a really, really great time with her. And we had so many questions from people in the audience that we thought we'd do a podcast to kind of elaborate and expand on some of the things that came up. We'll get into it later, but I know sleep was a hot topic. So we'll chat a little bit more about sleep from a naturopathic perspective and about some of the other brilliant things that Adrianna was talking about. So really excited to get going. So thanks again.
Thank you.
So first off, if you're up for it, I'd love to just hear a little bit about your journey to becoming a naturopathic doctor and why you went into naturopathic medicine.
Sure. Well, I always had a strong connection to health and wellness. I grew up in Alberta. I played sports my whole life, and I knew that I always wanted to be in the field of healthcare. I thought maybe I wanted to become a massage therapist. Perhaps I wanted to go into physiotherapy orthopedic medicine. I was interested in nutrition, but I didn't really have a clear path between any of those amazing professions as to what I wanted to do. And so I decided to do an undergrad in science, and I went out to U of T, and I had an amazing opportunity to play on the lacrosse team when I was there.
Cool.
And that was really my first experience and exposure to naturopathic medicine. Growing up in Alberta, I had never really come across it. It was not something that I was familiar with. Mm-hmm. But when I was on the team, one of my teammates had an ND that she was seeing, and she was really helping her with dialing in her diet and her supplements, and even treating her with injection therapy to help heal some of the injuries that she had. So that was my first exposure to it. But I didn't really understand or fully know the span of the profession. And then when I was in my fourth year of undergrad, I took this course called Complementary and Alternative Medicine. Mm-hmm. It was so cool. Every week we had a different practitioner or a different modality, a professional from a different modality come and speak to us about their profession and what they did, what their practice was like, and how they fit into the overall realm of healthcare. And it was so neat. At 1 week we had an acupuncturist, 1 week we had a nutritionist, 1 week we had a doctor that specialized in Ayurvedic medicine. And then 1 week we had an ND come and talk to us. And after that course, I just remember feeling so inspired and drawn to it and connected to it. It was this profession that encompassed so many values about health that I felt so connected to.
Cool.
Nutrition and acupuncture and botanical medicine and counseling and physical medicine. For the first time I felt really, really excited and engaged. And that kind of started my journey to being an ND.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. Was it that experience that maybe drew you more to naturopathic medicine over kind of conventional medicine as we know it, like general medicine and kind of the Western medicine that we see day to day here?
Yeah, for sure. That's such a good question. And it's one that I get really often. And honestly, for me, it wasn't really one or the other. Mm-hmm. You know, I felt drawn to the modalities that were a part of the scope of practice of naturopathic medicine. And I felt that, in BC, we are so lucky to be able to use more Western, quote unquote, type modalities. And I felt that in going into naturopathic medicine, I would have this opportunity to practice this complementary field and work in conjunction with all of those amazing MDs out there. And that's kind of my favorite part about it, is that we get to practice together in an integrative approach. We get to work together. Physios, massage therapists, NDs, MDs, we're all in it together. We all have the same goal at the end of the day. And it wasn't for me one versus the other, yes to this, no to that. It was, this is my path. I'm choosing to go down this pathway, and in doing so, get to build relationships and connections with all of the other amazing doctors and healthcare practitioners out there.
Totally. That's so cool. They say there's many ways to climb a mountain, and I think that that's a really great kind of analogy for what you just described. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. So now, as an ND, you wear quite a few hats. You sit on the board for the Canadian Naturopathic Medicine Association? I can't remember exactly what it's called, but you sit on the board. You teach at the school occasionally. You have a hand in your family business. Like, you've got a lot going on your plate. How do you keep yourself balanced and not overwhelmed? Because I can imagine some days are probably fairly overwhelming for you.
They can be at times, for sure. Being busy and engaging in all of those different aspects of my life, it excites me. It keeps me interested. I like having the different roles because they use different parts of my brain, but no doubt at times it gets a little bit overwhelming. And for me, I think that I just gravitate to the activities in my life that bring me peace. And for me, that's cooking. So when I feel like I'm a little bit on the edge and moving towards a state of chaos, if you call me, I'll probably be in my kitchen.
Really cool. Yeah. That's awesome. It's funny. Some people I know, like for me, myself, I'm not a huge cook or chef. And if you ask my boyfriend, to say it lightly, he doesn't always think that I'm the best at it. So that being said, he's really, really good at it. So he spends most of the time in the kitchen. But I do know every now and then if I do get in the kitchen, it's almost kind of meditative. Like you know, there's no distractions. You just kind of have this whole space to yourself, and you're just sort of in this like Zen mode where you can, you're creating something, but it doesn't require a lot of, there's no notifications, there's no emails, it's just you, your food, your kitchen, and you go.
And you go. And at the end of the day, you nourish yourself and you give yourself this incredible amount of goodness. And
so good. It's just, what's your dish? What's your what's the Dr. Hanson dish of the day?
I love making Buddha bowls, just different types of Buddha bowls, all different types of combinations and sauces, and it's delicious.
So good. And so many great healthy things you can put into a bowl. And they always, no matter what you put into them, they taste amazing.
It's so true.
Awesome. Professionally, we're kind of reverting back to what we were talking about. Something I wanted to ask about was kind of setting boundaries, because when you are wearing all these hats, it's super easy for people to say, can you quickly squeeze a client in here? Or can you stay late and, help with this? Or it's super easy, especially when you're in so many different roles. It's really easy to be asked to do things, or, especially with clients, and we both deal with clients, and, it's really easy for someone to say, hey, can you squeeze me in really quickly? And sometimes it's really hard to say no to that. What are some of your strategies for kind of setting boundaries, or professionally and even personally, to prevent yourself from taking on too much?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a hard question because it's totally a part of our profession, and it happens sometimes every day, sometimes once a week, sometimes once a month. But there are times when we have to be at work longer than we expected, and setting those boundaries is really, really important. I think that for me, my strategy is not so much creating a boundary on a specific day, or, saying I'm definitely going to be out of the office by 6:00 at night, or I'm not going to come in before 8. For me, that's just a little bit too restrictive. And so what I have found has worked best is ensuring that I carve out a certain amount of time every week where I can truly disconnect, where I can turn off my notifications, I can turn off my Wi-Fi, even if I'm staying in my apartment, or maybe I'll go up to the mountains, but I don't even have to get away, just have to disconnect. And be realistic about it too. I mean, ideally I like to have a day a week where I do that, but sometimes that doesn't happen. And so sometimes it's an hour, but even carving out an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours a week where I can turn my brain off of the big responsibilities around me and get grounded and just have some alone time. That's how.
And what do you do during that alone time? Is it just kind of like hanging out at your apartment, reading a book? Are you what are some of your favorite things to do during that time that you carved out for yourself?
I think it depends on what's happening for me that day or that week. Yeah, definitely. Sometimes it's reading a book. Sometimes it's going for a hike on the North Shore. I'm a total podcast geek, so I love just disconnecting and listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
So it depends on what's happening in those days. But like I said, cooking, exercise, listening to music. I am a live music fanatic. So yeah.
Awesome. So those are some of your favorite strategies. Anything that's non-negotiable, you're no negotiations. I'm doing this every day or every week, or is there certain things that are you cannot shake me. This is happening.
Yeah, for sure. It's such an easy question for me. It's sleep, hands down. Okay. No question about it. I mean, there was a time in my past where I wasn't getting enough sleep and I was struggling every single day. And now it's hilarious. My friends, my family, my partner, my boyfriend, people around me, they know that I'm 8-9 hours. And if I'm not getting it, I am not happy. So
you're not normal, Adrianna.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, that's a great segue to maybe start talking about sleep, because as we know, sleep is a super hot topic. And when we talked about it during our event, it came up, there was half the people were asking questions about sleep, even though it was such a brief part of the presentation. So I think this is a great chance for us to talk about sleep and just why it's so important. What is it about sleep that is so important for daily living?
Well, I think that sleep is one of those things that we don't give enough credit to. You know, we talk about the need to exercise, the need to have, some kind of mental decompression, whether it's meditation or yoga or reading, the need to socialize and be with friends. And these are all really, really important pieces of our daily lives, no doubt. But I think that sleep is often one of the first things to go in our day. And it's hard because we're all busy and we don't necessarily have enough time in the day to do all of the things that we want to do. And so sleep seems to be the one that suffers.
Totally.
But the challenging part is that sleep is essential for recovery and for repair and for healing. And it's out of the day. I don't know if you've heard of growth hormone. It's kind of a hot topic in the exercise and wellness world, but 75% of the growth hormone that we make is produced at night. And it's produced in a pulsatile fashion, which means it's not like we go to sleep and then 8 hours later we wake up and we were making a ton of growth hormone that whole time. We go to sleep and, an hour later we have a pulse of growth hormone, and then that continues through the night. But the majority of growth hormone that we make happens during that non-REM sleep, about an hour to 2 hours after we go to bed. And so if we're having any type of disruption to our circadian rhythm, that is hugely impacted. And that translates to an inability to recover and repair from exercise that we do, or a decreased ability to repair our nervous system or our immune system. And so growth hormone is needed to repair everything from our brain and our nerves to our muscles, and it's essential. And so that is really the kind of the foundation of why sleep is so important.
Wow, that's really great. So what do you tell people clinically? Like if they're saying to you, I'm just not getting enough sleep, or I can't fall asleep. That's something that I hear all the time is once I'm asleep, I'm good, but I cannot fall asleep. What's your advice to people that can't fall asleep at night? They just can't turn their brain off.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other thing about sleep is that sleep dysregulation, there are many different ways in which your sleep patterns can be affected. So like you said, some people have a hard time falling asleep at night. Some people are okay falling asleep, but then they have a hard time staying asleep. And what's really important is the way that we treat difficulties with sleeping depends on which one of those it is. Yeah. Because if it's that you can fall asleep but you're not able to stay asleep through the night, it's usually an issue with blood sugar regulation. Right. Whereas if you have an issue falling asleep, it's usually corresponding to your nervous system, and that's that fight or flight stress response, and that potentially you're producing too much cortisol late into the evening, and that's inhibiting your melatonin production. So if it's that someone's having a hard time falling asleep, we're usually working on really turning up the dial on the parasympathetic nervous system at night, the rest and digest, heal nervous system. So this means getting into a nice routine before you go to sleep, making sure that you're not using your electronics an hour to 2 hours before you go to bed.
Screen time.
Exactly. So really getting into that rhythm. And the other thing that's really, really important is having a routine where you go to bed at the same time and you wake up at the same time every day. Right. That's been shown to be one of the most effective things at regulating your sleep patterns and helping you fall asleep at nighttime is having, every night I go to sleep at 11 o'clock. Every day I wake up at 7. So those are some strategies for sure.
Any suggestions for people for that routine? Like what types of things would you put in that routine? Is it, journaling? Is it having a cup of tea? Or is it, I'm assuming it's different for every person, but any particulars that you suggest to people?
Anything that makes you feel calm. Anything that makes you feel at ease and at peace, and that brings you a little bit of joy. So for some people that's reading a book. For some people that's having a nightly meditation. For some people it's doing a gentle yin yoga routine before you go to bed. Some people love taking baths with Epsom salts.
Me, I like that.
Adding a little bit of lavender in there. Calming herbal tea. Those are all really, really good strategies. Again, like I said, I'm a podcast person. I love listening to stories and podcasts at nighttime. And I love it because it helps me turn my brain off from my responsibilities of the day, and even all of the fun things that I get to do the next day. It's easy to lie in bed and to think about everything that you have going on. So I love listening to a podcast because it helps me disconnect, but you're not having that stimulation from TV or from
a screen
phone.
Or a brightness or something like that.
Yeah.
And so what do you tell the people who are waking up? You're talking about blood sugar regulation. What does that usually mean? Are they not eating the right things at the right time? Or is that something more to do with diet or, exercise, things like that? What's kind of your approach in that sense?
Well, with blood sugar regulation, the first thing I'm looking at is what time are you having dinner? What are you eating for dinner? And also what their meal structure looks like through the day. So making sure that they're getting enough protein through the day, because protein is really important for regulating blood sugar. Making sure that they're eating at regular intervals, or of course, what works for one person might not necessarily work for the other person. But looking at the meal structure through the day, protein requirements, and then encouraging people to have a small snack of protein before bed. That really helps to regulate the blood sugar through the night.
Interesting. That's really cool. And I know during the balance sessions at the event, we talked a little bit about sometimes there being a cortisol spike, because oftentimes I know one of the people at the event asked because they happened to be waking up at the same time every night. And so you had mentioned that there's often a related cortisol spike. Is that something that's related to diet as well? Or what can cause that cortisol spike if someone's waking up at the same time every night? What does that mean?
It's the same. It's that connection to blood sugar and the blood sugar dysregulation. Right. So in order to prevent that cortisol spike from happening, the one thing we really want to do is make sure that blood sugar is regulated through the night. So protein-rich snack before bed, making sure that you're having an adequate amount of protein with dinner, making sure that dinner is a sufficient amount of time before you go to sleep. And by regulating blood sugar, that helps to prevent that cortisol spike.
And a significant amount before bed, eating dinner. What is that number? I mean, I assume it's different for every person in every case, but is there kind of a general rule of thumb that you would tell someone, like, eat 4 hours before you go to bed? Or I know I work odd shifts, and so sometimes I'll eat dinner quite late and go to bed an hour later, and then sometimes it's different. But is there kind of an optimal window between eating and sleep?
Great question.
And I'm kind of asking because I'm interested for myself as well.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I wish I could give you all of the answers.
Right?
I wish I could just tell you what to do. All the answers. Because I know if that was the case, can someone out there tell us what the answer is to all of these questions? I think that it really is trial and error. You have to work. You have to work to find out what's right for your body. So playing around with meal composition and times that you eat throughout the day, you'll find what works for you. One thing that people are doing to regulate insulin and blood sugar is intermittent fasting. So some people are just diehards for intermittent fasting. They found that it's been so effective at regulating weight and regulating insulin and blood sugar, and that's amazing. But it doesn't necessarily work for everyone. And I mean, it's actually really interesting. There's a subset of women that intermittent fasting has the opposite effect. And so it's going to be one of those trial and error things. I think as a general of thumb, if we can say not eating at least 2 hours before bed is a good way to give yourself some kind of structure to start with, but play around with it and find out what is right for you.
Cool. Yeah. And I mean, like most things, it's trial and error. And it's the same thing in physiotherapy, like even doing a joint mobilization, for example, like the amount, the duration, it's different. And a lot of it is trial and error. And so I think that's a lot of people don't realize that in health practitioner, or as being a health practitioner, a lot of what we're doing is trial and error. And I mean, maybe that's not something we want to admit to people, but you got to try stuff, and everyone responds differently. And I think that that's huge. And getting clients to understand that, it's all about listening to your body and listening to what you need and really kind of tuning in to what you feel when you're trying different things. And I find one of the ways that really works well for clients is journaling. And just having them keep notes. I felt this at this time. I ate this at this time before, or I did this exercise, or, I felt this at this after this. And I find that those parameters are huge for kind of dialing in what trial and error works and what doesn't. So
definitely. Yeah. The nice thing is we get to know more about the client or the patient as an individual and what their unique story is, right?
Yeah.
Something else that I recently started using in my practice is this assessment for blood sugar regulation. And so it's a method for assessing how your body responds to different types of food. And so you track your blood sugar at specific intervals throughout the day, before meals, after meals, and there's a regulated timeline and a guide as to how you create your different meals. So in terms of the amount of grams of carbohydrate versus grams of protein versus grams of fat. So
counting your macros within that meal and then
seeing how your blood sugar responds. And so it's a really cool assessment that we can objectively see how your body is responding to different composition of macronutrients. And
really neat. Like personalized medicine.
Exactly. And so if you wanted to truly dial it in and say, okay, I want to know exactly how I'm responding to this type of lunch or this type of dinner or this type of breakfast, we can do that and we can measure it. And we can assess it. And I think that would have a huge impact on kind of dialing in your late night routine too.
Yeah, that's amazing actually. And, there's so much talk about personalized medicine and, doing things like genetic testing, the 23andMe, for example, and really figuring out what works for you. Because so many people will try, for example, some people will go keto, some people will go paleo, others are going plant-based. And so all these diets, so many people have success stories with all of these different diets or different things. And yet
eating for your blood type, for example, and stuff like that. And yet some people are like, didn't really work for me. So having an actual tool like that tells you what does work for you is really incredible. That's really neat. Do you see the future of medicine going very personalized and using a lot of those tools?
I do, definitely. Yeah, we're seeing 23andMe, you mentioned, is a growing part of our practice. And we see patients becoming so interested in how they can fine-tune their exercise and their diet plans to their genetics, and that is just a fascinating concept to me.
Really cool. So you guys are using 23andMe clinically now to look at people's genetics and assess?
We are, genetic testing as a whole, to assess and to create very targeted treatment programs.
Really neat. That is really cool. And seeing good results with it?
Definitely, yeah.
That's amazing. That's so cool. Man, you guys are doing some really, really great stuff. So I want to kind of segue back into self-care and self-management and balance, etc. And I wanted to ask a little bit about what are some clinical signs that you might see in a client or in yourself even that might indicate that you might need to take a little bit more time for yourself or participate in a little bit more of a self-care activity or routine.
I think that what some people might not know is that the impact of stress on our body can play out in so many different facets of our life.
Yeah.
And so if for example, you've always had really optimal digestion and you never really had any issue with your digestion, but all of a sudden it starts to become a little bit out of balance, where you start to have some digestive concerns, that can be a sign that your stress response is imbalanced between your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system. When we're in sympathetic dominance, we're driving all of our blood flow to our periphery, because that means to our big muscles like our quads and our hamstrings and our biceps, because from an evolutionary perspective, being in sympathetic mode, our stressors were running from a bear or a lion. We weren't at that time thinking about digesting our food. And the opposite to that is when we're in our parasympathetic mode, we're sending blood flow to our core, which means we're increasing the amount of digestive enzymes and stomach acid that we produce. And we really support our ability to digest and absorb and break down the food that we eat. And so if we're spending a little bit too much time in sympathetic dominance or that warrior mode, then we can potentially have a decrease in our digestive function.
Right.
And one of the most common ways that this plays out is you hear about people saying that they got an ulcer in their stomach when they were overly stressed for an extended period of time. And so that's one of the connections with stress response and our physiology. Aside from that, I would say our immune system is another way that we can have an indication that potentially we need to devote a little bit more time to self-care and to that parasympathetic mode. When we're finding that our immune system is starting to be compromised, we're getting sick more often, or perhaps we have, a new allergy that we never had before, that can be an indication that we need to work a little bit on parasympathetic and sympathetic balance.
Interesting. And we talked a little bit about the parasympathetic and sympathetic balance during the balance sessions. And I found it really interesting. You had two really great terms. The first one for the sympathetic nervous system was the warrior. And I can't remember, what was the parasympathetic one?
The healer.
The healer, that's right. And your description of them was so perfect. And we talked a little bit about, we need both of those systems to manage ourselves optimally and to get through our day-to-day. Like we need to be sympathetic and then we need to be parasympathetic. But you talked a little bit about switching back and forth between them and having efficiency when moving between them and not getting stuck in certain modes. And I wanted to elaborate a little bit about that, because it's really important. And why is it so important to be able to switch between the two so efficiently?
It's so important because, they're both so necessary. One's not a villain and one's not the hero. I mean, the warrior, we need to have all of the functions of our sympathetic nervous system to deal with the stressors of our daily lives. I mean, driving to work in the morning, or the stress of a test, or, it's it's endless, the amount of times that we need our sympathetic nervous system or that warrior mode to jump into action. And we need our parasympathetic mode. We need that healer to come out and allow us to fall asleep and to digest our food and to heal from the exercise that we do. And so it's not necessarily about being in one all of the time versus the other, but really developing the ability to jump back and forth and trying to become really resilient and really to be able to springboard back and forth. I think that, it's natural for nature to take the path of least resistance.
Totally.
And oftentimes that means spending a little bit too much time in warrior mode. And then we start to see some of those signs of sympathetic dominance or that increased stress response we were talking about. Immune system, changes with hormones, changes with our digestion. But if we can develop that, if we can really work on increasing that resiliency and that agility to switch back and forth between warrior and healer, then that's going to really help us find balance.
Awesome. Yeah. It's so neat. It's such an interesting topic, and we see so many people that are just stuck in that warrior mode. They can't rest and digest. And it's funny because we talked a little bit about it earlier. Our stressors aren't bears threatening our little cave anymore. It's tests. It's the guy riding our butt while we're driving to work. It's, that email from your boss that may not have sat well, or it's little things like that. And our system responds the same to it. It's just that the stressors are different. And unfortunately, in our day-to-day lives, a lot of those stressors have the same response, but we're having them a lot more often. So being able to manage them is really, really important.
Exactly. Learning to share space between the warrior and the healer.
Big time. And I remember during the event, you talked a lot about trying to get into the healer mode or the parasympathetic mode before eating, because that helps with digestion. Any suggestions on how to kind of get into that mode before we eat? Because we know when it's literally called rest and digest. And so when we're eating, we want to be digesting. We don't want to be driving to work with that person riding our butt in that warrior mode, trying to jam a sandwich down our throat to try to get to work on time.
Exactly.
That's not going to be digested well. So any suggestions for at least getting into rest and digest mode when we're about to digest?
Yeah, definitely. I think the buzzword we always talk about or hear about is mindful eating. And so the big thing for that is really focusing on what you're doing. So you said it. I mean, if you can at least try to carve out time and space for eating, that would be the number one biggest thing. So really trying to avoid eating at your desk or avoid eating while watching TV or while driving to work in the morning. That would be the biggest thing for sure, is that, we recognize, okay, I'm going to take 5 minutes or 10 minutes or ideally 15 minutes or 20 or 30 to sit down and have this meal. So that's kind of step one for sure. And then the coolest thing about cooking is that when we're cooking, we're actually starting the first phase of digestion. So when we're smelling our food and looking at our food and tasting our food as we're cooking, we're turning on our brains to get into that healing mode.
Right.
It increases your amylase production in your mouth. It starts. It's called the cephalic phase of digestion. It starts the most important part, which is prepping your body for the food that you're going to eat.
So cool.
So if you can take 5 minutes before you eat to either meditate about eating, think about eating, take 5 breaths, and really, concentrate on the fact that we're going to
smell your food, I guess.
Exactly. Then that's a really awesome way to get into healing mode.
Cool. Such good advice. And I know I'm guilty of it. On my way to work, I might pick up a latte and a muffin or a smoothie or something on my way to work, and I'm drinking it or I'm eating it as I'm driving to work, because it's just how we work these days.
It totally is. I'm guilty of it too. So it's such an important reminder that if we can take that 5 minutes before to just smell our food and get out of change our state, right? Like take ourselves out of that moment of being busy, for a few minutes, then it goes a long way.
So important. So kind of jumping off of that topic of cooking and, you know, trying to get into that state, what's kind of an ideal day in the life of Dr. Hanson? Like what does a day that's like, you know, a nice balance between the warrior and the healer and, you know, looking after all the self-care, yet managing all the hats that you wear. What's kind of an ideal day in the life for you?
An ideal day in the life or a day in the life?
I'm sure some days are less ideal than others, but let's find a balance. Let's find like a regular solid day. Yeah.
That's a great question. Okay, so I wake up in the morning. I love water, so I typically have a quick shower every day. It really helps to wake me up. You know, even if it's just 30 seconds to get me ready for the day. I typically make a cup of tea or a cup of coffee in the morning. I set aside a few minutes to check a couple emails before I go to work. And then I commute. So I drive 25 minutes to Burnaby, just like you.
Me too, yep.
But honestly, I've grown to really enjoy that time because for me, it's 25 minutes where I don't look at my phone and I don't talk to anyone. I put on a really awesome song to pump me up for the day, and I've kind of really grown to enjoy it. And it's like,
I have too, actually.
Yeah,
it's your own time.
It's my me time.
Yeah.
And for me, that's so important. I'm an introverted person, and I mean, I'm a balance between both, but for me, I recharge with alone time. And
totally.
I really need that time. So it is 25 minutes where I just get to be by myself and think about the things that are upcoming for the day, and it's really nourishing. So drive to work. As you know, Catalyst can be a little bit chaotic, so it's a little bit of a whirlwind for, I don't know, anywhere from...
A good chaotic. Busy, great chaotic.
It's so good. It's so empowering and energizing, and it's awesome.
We work with great people.
We totally do, and it's such an amazing environment there. So, but from the time that you walk in the door in the morning to the time that you leave, it can be a little bit busy.
You're on.
You're totally on. Yeah. And so after... I definitely need some time to recharge, recuperate, and get myself grounded. Yeah. And so for me, that'll either be going to the gym or playing soccer. I have this amazing soccer team that just brings me so much. They're hilarious. So play soccer on a Monday or a Thursday, or I'll try to, you know, meet up with some friends and have some social engagement, or I'll just go home and I'll cook. And I guess, yeah, that would be a day in the life.
That's awesome. So there's a balance between, you know, like waking up, nourishing yourself, having some alone time before, and then you're on all day, you're busy, you're treating clients all day, and then you time. So it's kind of like a pre-charge and a recharge.
It sounds a little boring, but yeah, that's it.
I love it. I love it. And it's so important. Alone time, really, I mean, like, personally, I live with my boyfriend, my partner, and there's not a lot of alone time, but it's amazing for me. I've carved out time now. I've been really into baths lately, and it's a way to kind of just hide away for half an hour, sometimes an hour, sometimes an hour and a half. I'm in there a long time sometimes, but just depending on how much I need. But alone time is really, really important, and sometimes when you live with someone, it's a little harder, but I'm a better partner once I've had my alone time as well. So we're better clinicians. We're, you know, like, there's a huge amount of energy transference and delivery that's required when you are caring for others. And so you cannot pour from an empty cup. So finding ways to fill your own cup is huge. And I totally agree with alone time and recharging. That's awesome.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, it's huge. It makes all the difference in the world. This has been so great. I'm learning so much. I want to just keep going and just picking your brain and like learning more from you. But I think because it's finally gotten dark out, and I think it's time that we start to wrap up. So before I ask my final question, which I ask to everyone, I want to just see how people can reach you. How can people find you online?
People can find me at Catalyst Kinetics, so you can come out to Burnaby, say hi, check out our awesome space if you want. Or you can reach me on my Catalyst email, which is ahanson@catalystkinetics.com. Or you can find me through my website, which is dradriannahanson.com.
Awesome. Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
So the last question, and I ask this to everyone, is what is your definition of balance?
Ooh,
The podcast is called The Balance Collective, so we have to throw that buzzword out there at some point.
I love it. That's awesome. Well, my definition of balance would be finding small wins for yourself every single day. So I think that when we think about our life, we have, kind of 5 main components to it. We've got our health, we've got our family, we've got our social engagements and our friends, we've got our career and our professional aspirations, we've got our spiritual and our mental, emotional health. And if we can find a small win in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or all of those every single day, then for me, that is truly finding balance. And, not trying to set these incredibly lofty goals. I mean, while big idea and big picture goals are so important, if we can try to get these small, attainable, sustainable achievements and gifts to ourselves and little pieces of devotion to ourselves every day, then for me, that is truly finding balance. And I think that they add up over time. There's a cumulative effect. It's kind of like little credits of goodness towards yourself. And
so good.
That would definitely be my definition of balance. Yeah.
Finding little bits of gratitude in everything. It's huge. I really like that answer. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I have really enjoyed this and learned a ton. And I'm going to keep picking your brain because I learn so much from you every time I have a conversation like this. So thank you.
It's been such a pleasure, Danny. Thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to the next one.
Awesome. We'll do it again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found this episode as expansive as I did. If you enjoyed listening, please like, subscribe, and review. It means so much to us. If you would like to learn more about The Balance Collective and our offerings, please visit www.thebalancedcollective.com or hit us up on Instagram @The Balance Collective. Thank you so much, and please keep spreading your light.